The fluorescent lights in the pediatric wing of Chicago Mercy buzzed like an endless whisper. The cold antiseptic smell hung over everything, like invisible frost gurney wheels, bed curtains, the rag dolls resting beside the pillows of stubborn children with fates too heavy to fight. I leaned against the window pane, fingers curled around my wrist, where the silver bracelet engraved with hope pressed cool against my skin. Noah was asleep. My son always fell asleep after another day of battling medicine needles and exhaustion. Yet before drifting off, he had still asked Mom, will I get to see snow tomorrow? It was November. Snow hadn't come to Chicago yet. But snow was a promise clean, new, untouched in his world. Maybe, sweetheart, I told him. Maybe tomorrow. My 12-hour shift finally ended when the wall clock ticked past 11:30. The worn soles of my nursing shoes whispered across the glossy linoleum, a quiet farewell to another day survived. I signed off reports at the nurse's station, reminded my colleague about the girl in bed 12's evening dose, and headed toward the elevator. In the parking basement, the air was sharp, carrying a metallic chill from the vents. The rows of cars were sparse, the empty spaces breathing softly like something alive. My old Honda waited under a flickering light, that pale, sickly glow that seemed to cling on out of habit. As I slid the key into the ignition, my phone buzzed unknown number. It's not really unknown, I just liked pretending. Time's up, Lawson. 43,000. Tonight. My hands gripped the steering wheel until the knuckles blanched. That number 43,000 had circled through my life too many times, like ink bleeding through paper. I'd begged for extensions, applied for loans, and visited the bank thrice. Sold my wedding ring without a second thought. I'd even considered selling the only thing left of value, peace. But peace, it seemed, had already been pawned months ago. The second message followed before I could breathe Fifth and Loomis. 1 a.m. Come alone. Loomis is the industrial district. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back looked like a thin version of me, almost transparent. I turned the key. The engine coughed awake. A random jazz station filled the silent saxophone notes, lingering, clinging to the city, before fading away. The road from the hospital to the loop was nearly empty at this hour. Streetlights dripped gold through the overpass shadows, pooling in gaps like secrets. My heart jumped each time I drove through one. I thought of Noah. He sometimes asked why his roommate's hair was falling out, and how he tried to hold back tears to seem brave. I'd bought him a little navy knit cap that day, and he'd worn it proudly like he'd just made the team. I realized I was smiling, crookedly. When I turned onto Loomis, the clock read 12:42. The abandoned warehouse sat heavy and still. Now and then, a cigarette ember glowed red behind a shipping crate. I parked near the concrete wall, locked the doors, and tucked my phone into my cardigan pocket. The air smelled of oil and rain that hadn't fallen yet, the kind that reminded me of picking Noah up from art class. His hands covered in paint eyes, bright with sunlight. 3 men waited at the far end of the alley, leaning against a brick. I recognized the navy overcoat of the one in the middle. He raised a hand lazily, like tossing a greeting. On time. I like people who respect time. His voice was rough, the edge of a dull knife that could still cut. I can only give you 2,000 this week. And he whistled softly. 43,000, Sarah Lawson. Numbers don't care about good intentions. He nodded toward the bigger man beside him. Connor, remind her how we recover our investments. Connor laughed, a hollow sound that didn't echo. You'd better hold tight when you've got someone sweet at home. No, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Noah's just a child. The wind shifted, carrying the distant moan of a train whistle. The man in the middle tilted his head, listening not to the train, but to something inside the silence. Every child's a child, he murmured. But some make adults pay faster. My hand found the bracelet again. Hope. The engraving was faded, but still legible if I brought it close. Here's what's gonna happen, he said, flicking his cigarette to the ground. You're coming with us. We'll talk about new payment terms. Maybe someone else wants to buy your debt, just a few signatures. No. This time it came out like the last spark of a lighter. I'm not going anywhere. Connor stepped forward, his boots splashing through puddles. I backed up, spine hitting the cold metal railing. I could hear my heartbeat, loud, steady, desperate. Then came another sound, sharp but calm, like fabric tearing. I believe she said no. The voice came from the darkness, low, measured, confident. The 3 men turned. From the end of the alley, a figure in a black coat approached unhurried. When the light hit him, I saw the face, sharp lines, unreadable calm, gray eyes like tempered steel, not cold but forged. Who the hell are you? The middleman asked, smile slipping. The one buying the debt, he said. Right now. This isn't a marketplace friend. The newcomer stopped just a few feet away. I'll pay double what you're holding. Tonight, in exchange, I take full ownership of Lawson. He said my name as if he already owned it. Connor snorted, then froze halfway through, his laugh throat-catching. 2 black sedans glided in from both ends of the alley, silent as shadows. 4 men stepped out wordless, taking their places in the dark. They didn't move, just waited. I didn't see a nod, but something in the air shifted a decision already made. The middleman's face hardened. Name, he asked. Lucas Hayes. The name dropped heavily between the walls. Even I felt the change. Hayes is the name of a magazine cover and a finance report. Investment empire, lavish philanthropy, rumors of both halos and horns. The man exhaled through his nose. He didn't think charity worked night shifts. Lucas tilted his head. Daylight isn't always enough. Their words rolled like marbles on glass, soft but dangerous. My hands had stopped trembling. The wind lifted my hair, brushing my cheek with a faint trace of sandalwood from his coat. Let's go, Lawson, Lucas said, as if concluding a meeting. Your son deserves a quiet night. She's not going anywhere, the other man snapped. No signature, no deal. Lucas looked down at the glowing cigarette butt and pressed it out with his boot. You just sold it. One of the thugs cursed and reached into his jacket. I didn't know if it was a habit or a threat, but the metallic click that followed sounded too close. Then a flash of white light swept from the sedan, enough to reveal the gun in his hand. No one moved. Lucas's men didn't draw. They only stood eyes flat still as mirrors. The man with the gun faltered, shoved it back into his jacket jaw tight. The leader sighed. Fine, double, cash, no paper. Lucas nodded once, a handshake deal out in the cold fitting for you. But I prefer receipts. No receipts, the man hissed. I do, Lucas replied evenly. And so will you, because the man behind you likes things clean enough to stay out of trouble. He wouldn't risk his name over a nurse with overdue bills. The other's eyes flickered. You know who I work for? I do, Lucas said. And he knows me. That ended it. A briefcase opened, a card was scanned. The alley light seemed brighter, as if the money transfer warmed the bulbs. My pulse finally slowed. Done, the man muttered. May God bless. Charity? He disappeared into the shadows. When they were gone, the air felt lighter. The smell of rain and wood replaced the tension. Lucas slipped off his gloves and tucked them away. Movements precise, surgical. Get in, he said, voice neither kind nor cold. I have to go back to my son. Then let's go. He opened the sedan door and checked his watch. I'll take you. Why did you do that? I asked, fingers brushing the bracelet. He paused because some investments are worth more than numbers. His gaze flicked to my wrist. And some words are worth reading even when they fade. What word? Hope. I don't remember whether I breathed out or in after that. He rounded the car, slid behind the wheel, hands resting on the steering like a pianist's controlled, dangerous elegant. The car rolled out of Loomis, Chicago unfolded windows glowing like scattered gold combed through black hair. Inside the cabin, the heater hummed wipers, swaying back and forth like erasing stray lines on a sketch. Who are you really? I asked. Lucas's gray eyes met mine in the rear view. The man who buys debts, he said. And sometimes the one who pays for others' mistakes. You don't know me. I know enough. A pause. Sarah Lawson. Double shifts. 7-year-old son. Navy knit cap. She hates black coffee and loves cappuccinos with foam, but quits when her savings drop below 3 digits. I blinked. You've been following me, no. He steered smoothly into traffic. I observe the people I intend to help. A faint smile ghosted his lips. I'm usually right. Right about what? When I drop you off, you'll stop by Noah's window for 10 seconds and watch him sleep without blaming yourself. Then you'll go home to your little apartment in Pilsen, turn on the heater, and for the first time in months, sleep without dreaming of bills. I turned to the window. The city drifted by bridges, arching over the river like stitched eyelids. I felt myself drifting, too afraid of the stillness. Peace to me always came with a price tag. Tomorrow, Lucas said quietly, you'll meet Dr. Chen. She's reviewed Noah's file. We found a new path. Dr. Chen, at Mount Sinai. That's impossible. There's a months-long waitlist and a high cost. Don't worry about the cost. He cut me off gently, leaving no room for argument. What do you want in return? The words escaped before I could stop them. They hung between us, trembling like a train door closing before I knew where it went. Lucas stayed silent. The wipers kept rhythm, the tires hummed. Then he said, steady as the road ahead, I want you and your son to be safe. The rest, we'll see tomorrow. The car turned into the hospital's rear entrance. Rain finally began fine as paper dust. Lucas braked softly, no jolt. He leaned slightly toward me, close enough that I saw his lashes tremble. Sarah, he said, as if confirming something. When you need to call this, he placed a small card in my hand. No logo, no title, just a phone number and a single letter in the corner. H for Hayes, I asked. H for something else. He glanced toward Noah's window on the 3rd floor, then back at me. It's also the letter on your bracelet. Before I could answer, he pressed the unlock button. No goodbye. Just that steady gray gaze lingering a heartbeat too long before letting go. I stepped out. The rain dotted my face like punctuation marks. Inside the corridor, I looked up at Noah's window. His shadow glowed behind the curtain, peaceful enough to ache. I realized I'd been standing there exactly 10 seconds, just like he'd said. When I turned away, my hand brushed the card in my pocket, its edges sharp, like the outline of an unread decision. That night before sleep claimed me, one thought ticked in my head like a clock shifting gears. If peace can be bought, who's selling it? And why did it feel like the seller had already touched my fate and I hadn't resisted? If you want to know whether Lucas Hayes truly is the debt buyer he claims to be, if his darkness runs deeper, and whether Sarah Lawson will choose conditional peace or unsafe freedom, continue to part 2. The first envelope of secrets is about to open. That Chicago morning was as murky as a dream you haven't fully woken from. A gentle light slipped through unfamiliar white curtains when I opened my eyes. It wasn't the hospital ceiling, nor the low ceiling of my old Pilsen apartment. It was a high ceiling traced with gilt molding. A faint scent of white orchids mingled with lightly roasted coffee. I bolted upright. The silver bracelet was still on my wrist, cold and real. But my phone purse employee badge and everything else had vanished. Before I could understand it, the door opened, and a middle-aged woman stepped in. She wore a pale gray dress, and her composed gait made me feel like I'd been caught doing something wrong inside my dream. "Good morning, Ms." Lawson said, voice steady, warm, impeccably polite. "Mr. Hayes is waiting for you in the study. Mr. Hayes," my voice came out hoarse. "I have to get back to my son. I can't." "The boy is fine," she interjected gently. "A private nurse is with him in his room. All treatment costs have been covered." And she paused, her look neither cold nor warm. "He has been moved onto a new protocol on Dr. Patricia Chen's orders." The name dropped into my mind like a pebble hitting a still lake. I knew of Dr. Chen, one of the foremost pediatric oncologists. But she didn't work at Chicago Mercy. People waited at least 6 months for a consultation. I shook my head, unable to believe it. "Mr. Hayes would like to see you," the woman repeated, courteous and firm, as if these were the rules of another universe where I was only a guest. I threw on a light coat left hanging in the room and followed her down the stairs. The house was so large that our footsteps echoed like we were inside a cathedral. The wood floor glowed amber at the bottom of the staircase. The walls were hung with oil paintings signed by names I'd only ever seen in auction magazines. Outside the windows, Lake Forest's waters were a deep blue-green, veiled in mist like a living ink wash painting. Lucas Hayes sat in the study. He wore a white shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbow. Morning light struck the straight bridge of his nose and those unreadable gray eyes. A cup of coffee still untouched sent a whisper of steam toward the window. Awake, he said not a question, not a surprise. "Why am I here?" I stayed far enough away to conceal the tremor in my hands. "Where did you take me to my house?" Lucas replied. "You passed out last night. Shock or low blood sugar, possibly. I wasn't going to leave you in that filthy place. You had no right." The words came too fast, thinner than I intended. "You can't just take people like that." "Perhaps you forget," he said, eyes still on the papers before him. "I bought your debt. And with debt comes responsibility?" The line stuck in my throat. There was something profoundly wrong about a man speaking of responsibility in the same tone one uses to quote a stock price. Yet his calm, not condescending gaze left me unsure whether to be angry or afraid. I managed, "I don't need anyone to take responsibility for me. I need my son treated." "Exactly." Lucas closed the file and stood. "That's also what I'm doing." He rounded the desk and stopped half a meter from me. The distance turned the air into something else thicker, charged with unnamed things. I could smell sandalwood and coffee on his clothes, an incredible scent with something familiar beneath it. "Do you know why I helped you, Sarah? I assume because you pity me?" I shot back bitter. He smiled faintly. "No, I don't help the pitiable. I invest in people who can stand up after being held down." I said nothing. In the room with golden light, each of his words fell into me like drops of water, quiet, persistent. "And if I refuse this investment?" I asked. "Then you're still free," he said, voice lower. "But that freedom may cost you more than you think." I heard what he left unsaid, Noah. Silence stretched longer than it had to. At last, I asked, "What do you want from me?" Lucas lifted his head. Suddenly his eyes softened. "I need someone with medical knowledge whom I can trust, who isn't tied to any institution, and who knows how to keep a secret." I looked at him and understood. "You want me as your private nurse. Not just for me." His brow ticked up. "For the people I care about. A delicate way to say my organization." I drew a breath. "You think I can care for the sort of men who pull guns in the middle of the night?" "You once kept a dying child alive through an entire night without letting go of his hand," Lucas said slowly. You're strong enough to keep anyone alive, even the most frightening. I couldn't tell if it was praise or a test, but it tightened my chest. The housekeeper, the same woman as before, entered and set down a breakfast tray, croissants, poached eggs, and a cappuccino crowned with foam. I looked from the cup to him. "You did your homework," I said softly. Lucas replied, "That's how I ensure the safety of the people I work with." "Work with Sarah." "Not obey." I didn't answer. I took a sip. The familiar bitterness pricked my tongue, but my heartbeat strangely steadied as I swallowed. "Is my son truly all right?" I asked barely above a whisper. Lucas studied me for a long moment, then opened a drawer and handed me an iPad. The screen brightened, Noah sleeping peacefully, a brunette nurse reading beside his bed. "Live," he said. "You can call him any time." I nodded as tears welled not from fear, but because for the first time in months, I could watch my child sleep without the beep of a monitor intruding. I didn't realize I was crying until Lucas silently passed me a tissue. "How long would you want me to work for you?" I asked, dabbing my eyes. "Until you stop seeing me as a kidnapper," he said, half teasing, half truthful. A brief stillness sets half teasing, half proper with a shared secret. Outside, the mist lifted from the lake, the light turned warmer, and something in me shifted, just enough to know the line between afraid and curious had begun to blur. At noon, the housekeeper showed me around the estate. The building stood on a broad tract facing the lake ringed by maple trees at the end of their autumn blaze. Red leaves skated across the water like a slow fire. To the west was a giant glasshouse. She said Lucas grew orchids there, though no one had ever seen him cut a single stem to bring indoors. At the far end of the grounds stood a small wooden cottage where the master goes when he needs quiet, she said. Through the half-closed door, I glimpsed bookshelves, a piano, and a faded photograph on the desk. A boy about 8 standing between 2 adults, all 3 dressed in black. The photo was monochrome, but the child's eyes shone with a haunting brightness like Lucas's. The housekeeper called me back, her tone still cultured, but her gaze a touch cooler. "That room is outside your permitted areas," I murmured an apology. But the image of the boy would not leave my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, Loomis returned the rain, the footfalls, and Lucas's gray gaze cutting through the dark. I wondered, did he save me out of pity amusement, or for some other purpose a soft knock sounded? I turned on the lamp. Lucas stood at the threshold, black coat draped over one shoulder. "Did I wake you?" he asked. "No, I wasn't sleeping." His eyes drifted over the room and came to rest on the silver bracelet on the table. That bracelet. The word hope. "How long have you worn it since Noah was born?" I said. "I wear it to remind myself I'm not allowed to despair." Lucas nodded. "It's beautiful, but metal is cold. Sometimes hope needs something that knows how to be warm." He set an envelope on the table. "This is a contract. Please read it carefully. If you agree, sign in the morning. If not, a car will take you back to the hospital." I picked it up. "Would you let me go?" He pressed a thin smile that didn't touch his eyes. "I keep my promises, but I can't promise the world outside will keep you safe." He turned to leave. When the door clicked shut, I opened the envelope. Just 2 pages, an employment agreement salary of $50,000 per month, with an absolute confidentiality clause. At the bottom, a printed signature, Lucas Hayes. Beside it, a small seal embossed with a white orchid. I sat very still. Everything in the room felt almost overly refined linen drapes, crystal lights, leather-bound books. The breath of someone long accustomed to luxury, yet still in complete control, lingered. Only the envelope in my hand felt different. It didn't belong to this world. It was like a small door opening onto a place I might not return from if I stepped through. I set the envelope down and looked out the window. The lake wore a veil of silver mist. In the moonlight, I caught the outline of someone standing by the shore, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the water. Tall, still, as if carved into the night. Lucas Hayes. I don't know why I believed it, but something told me he hadn't merely saved me. He was waiting to start another game where hope would no longer be just a word etched into a bracelet. Mornings in Lake Forest had a strange stillness, as if this place didn't belong to the real world. Sunlight filtered through the red maple canopy and fell onto the tiles in shimmering panes like stained glass in a cathedral. I woke from a fitful night. The envelope was still on the table unsigned. For a moment, I thought of leaving. Just walk out the gate, call a cab, return to Chicago. Mercy hold Noah tight and pretend none of this had happened. But reason knew better that the world out there was no longer safe. The name Lucas Hayes had changed everything in a way you can't undo. I went downstairs. The housekeeper, that incredible courteous woman, was brewing tea in the kitchen. "Where is Mr. Hayes?" I asked. "In the gym, east side." I blinked. A man like him, with hair always neat and white shirts pressed, was hard to imagine as someone who sweats. The path to the gym ran through a long, oak-paneled corridor, windows on both sides, opening onto the garden in its morning mist. As I approached, piano music drifted from somewhere not blaring electronic beats, but Claire de Lune, gentle, soft, and as wistful as water. The door was ajar. I stopped dead. Lucas was there in slanting light. His black t-shirt was damp, clinging across his shoulders, the lines of muscle tightening with each strike at the heavy bag. Every punch was clean, rhythmic, never gratuitous, but precise enough to unnerve. I watched without daring to blink. Something about him felt like a classical score written in the language of thunder, dangerous, beautiful, and disciplined. He noticed me in the mirror. Without turning, he said, "Did you read the contract?" "I did," I answered quietly, "and I haven't signed." Lucas stopped, dropped his gloves, and turned toward me. A bead of sweat slid along his cheekbone, catching the light like a thin silver stroke. "I'm not surprised." "Because you know I'm afraid," I said. "No." He stepped closer. "Because I know you still believe in good, even after it's disappointed you." The words cinched around my heart. He watched me a moment longer, then reached for a glass on a nearby table and poured water. "Sarah," he went on, "trust is a luxury in my world. With you, it's the one thing that makes me want to try again." I didn't know what to say. There was something in his voice that made me want to believe and want to run. "I don't want to be trapped in your world," I said. "I want to do my job, care for my son, and disappear from this mess." Lucas huffed a small laugh. "If disappearing were easy, do you think people would need me?" He pulled a photograph from his pocket and set it on the table. I leaned in Connor. The big man who'd threatened me at Loomis lay on a gurney, face swollen, eyes shut. "He was attacked last night," Lucas said evenly. "Someone didn't like that he let you fall into my hands. The blood in my veins ran cold." "You mean you and Noah are in the middle of a game you didn't choose? I'm just making sure it doesn't end too soon." The room suddenly felt heavy. I took a step back until my spine touched the wall. "Who are you really, Lucas?" He was silent for a beat, then answered slowly. Each word weighed, the man who cleans up other people's mistakes. And sometimes the one who makes them. For the first time I looked at him and saw the darkness behind his composure, which was dense, dangerous, and so compelling that it frightened me. He came closer, stopping an arm's length away. "I don't need you to believe me. I need you to stay until you and your son are safe." "And after that?" I asked. "After that?" He paused, a shadow crossing his eyes. "Maybe you'll be the one to decide whether I deserve an ordinary life." At noon, I was given a small office in the East Wing, next to the medical room. Medical files and a set of minimalist instruments were on the desk, so orderly it felt sterile. I opened a file at random. The patient's name was only an initial, VM, clavicle fracture blunt trauma. "No police report." A low voice sounded behind me. "These aren't hospital charts, so don't ask." I turned. Vincent, the silver-haired man who'd driven the sedan at Loomis. He smiled. Fine lines bracketed his eyes, but his gaze was sharp as a blade. "I'm Vincent. Mr. Hayes' assistant is the keeper of all secrets here." "And me, the one allowed to save people who shouldn't die," he said, soft as breath. "Welcome to the real world, nurse." I said nothing. After he left, I stood staring at the file, a chill running along my spine. The room felt smaller, as if someone were watching through invisible glass. Night. I stepped onto the second-floor balcony. The lake was still veiled in mist. Far-off light from the greenhouse spilled across the water like a shattered Milky Way. Lucas stood there leaning on the railing shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "Do you always stay up this late?" he asked without turning. "I'm used to Noah's ventilator hum at the hospital. Without it, I feel off." "Silence is breathing too," he said. I rested my arms on the rail beside him, looking down at the water. "You don't sleep, I haven't learned how." His smile was faint. "When you make a living holding other people's secrets, you're afraid to close your eyes because no one's holding yours." I glanced over. Moonlight etched his cheek like a fine silver cut. "You sound like a failed poet." Maybe he chuckled. "But at least I have an audience." Silence fell again this time, not uncomfortable. Just wind in the leaves, a gentle slap of water, and the sandalwood trace of his cologne. "Lucas," I said softly, "have you ever lost someone?" He turned. The question seemed to touch some hidden place. A long quiet. Then, in a rough, low voice, "When I was 10, my mother was killed in a staged robbery. The police called it an accident. But I knew who did it. Since then, I've learned justice doesn't live in a file. It lives in the hands of those strong enough to claim it." I swallowed. He said it as lightly as the weather, but his eyes didn't match tired and cold, like a man who'd walked through hell and had to go back every day. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't be." He stared out at the lake. "Sometimes loss is the only way we learn how to love, right?" The words tightened something in my chest. Something nameless, tender, and aching moved through the space between us. I turned away and Lucas touched my hand. It was the lightest touch testing whether I'd pull back. I didn't. His hand was warm, steady. When he spoke, his voice was so low I had to look up to hear Sarah. "Don't be afraid of me." I wanted to believe him. But that tone scared me more than anything because it didn't sound like a liar's. It sounded like a promise. And I'd believed too many promises. He let go and stepped back. "Tomorrow you start. Vincent will take you to the patients. Tonight, let yourself be quiet." He walked away, leaving me in the mist and faint sandalwood. I stood there a long time until the greenhouse lights in the distance flickered out. I saw my reflection on the lake's surface, a woman no longer sure where fear ended and trembling began. And somewhere in my chest, a question looped without end. If he is truly dangerous, why do his eyes make me feel so safe? 3 days later, I officially started work in the east wing of the Hayes estate. Everything ran so quietly and precisely that I began to fear the silence. The people I treated never gave their real names. They were only called by initials JLK. Most of them injured with bullet wounds or deep gashes, stitched carefully shut injuries that would never appear in any legal medical record. At first, they watched me with wary eyes, then accepted me in silence, as if I were a required part of this world. Lucas rarely appeared. He sent brief messages through Vincent. "She's learning to look into the dark without losing her light." I couldn't tell if that was praise or a warning. On the third night, while I was checking the medicine cabinet, the housekeeper came in holding a black velvet box. "Mr. Hayes would like you to wear this tonight." "Tonight?" I asked. "A gala in downtown Chicago. The master says your presence is necessary." Before I could react, she opened the box. Inside lay an off-the-shoulder black dress satin, falling soft as smoke. At the bottom sat silver heels and a small handwritten note. "Don't be afraid of the light. It only reflects what you haven't dared to see in yourself. LH." I stood frozen for a moment. Then, without knowing why, I picked up the dress. That evening, the limousine stopped in front of the Waldorf Astoria. The lobby lights mirrored across glass walls, creating another opulent, hazy, and cold world. I stepped out. Lucas's arm was already there for me. He wore a black suit, a silver gray tie hair neat, and a collar open a single button. In the night, he was a kind of orderly light, not blinding, but enough to make everything else step back a pace. "I don't think I belong here," I murmured, my hand tightening his arm. "Lucas said you belong more than the ones trying to lips-tipping with a glint of humor I rarely saw." Inside, the ballroom blazed. Crystal chandeliers fell like rivers of light. The music was classic jazz, smooth and costly. Guests looked at Lucas with a mix of respect and caution. He gave a few nods but didn't linger. When his palm settled at the small of my back to guide me, it felt protective and restraining. "Why bring me here?" I asked under my breath, as he steered us toward a central table. "So they see you exist," he said, "and understand I'm not playing alone anymore, and what do I get out of it, Safety?" He looked at me so earnestly that I couldn't laugh. As the night went on, I realized something no one here was truly at ease. Beneath the champagne and smiles, each gaze was a thin blade testing, measuring, probing for the first concession. A gray-haired man approached Lucas' British accent, polished and cool. "Hayes, you don't often leave your cave. Your companion is intriguing?" Lucas smiled, then introduced us. "Sarah Lawson, my medical advisor." The man offered his hand, gripping harder than necessary. "A nurse at Mercy, isn't that right? I read about a suspicious death there last month." I froze. His words slid over my skin like a knife. Lucas only tilted his head, still smiling. "Some people like to weaponize the past," he said mildly. "Unfortunately for you, she has no weaknesses worth hiding." The man laughed. "And you?" Lucas set his glass down. His voice was soft and unyielding. "I do, but no one here has the nerve to touch them." The air around the table cooled. The man chuckled thinly and withdrew. I was still trying to understand what had just happened when Lucas bent to murmur in my ear. "See, in this world, truth is never asked for. It's only used to threaten." After the gala, Lucas led me onto the balcony. From the 28th floor, Chicago spread below like a shattered Milky Way. Wind threaded through my hair with the scent of coming rain. "Why did you really need me here?" I asked. "Don't say it's so they see I exist." "There's another reason." Lucas leaned against the railing, gaze far off. "I have enemies at that table. If they believe I have someone beside me, ordinary vulnerable, they'll pull their fangs for now. The solitary are the easiest prey." I studied him. "So I'm your shield, no?" He turned, eyes resting on me. "You're the reason I still need one." My throat went dry. I wasn't sure I'd heard right. He moved closer, unhurried until only breath separated us. "I know you're afraid of me," he said softly. "I'd rather you be afraid than gone. You think I could disappear from you in my world, anyone can." The wind picked up. My eyes stung from the gust or the surge of feeling, and I couldn't tell. Lucas brushed a stray strand from my cheek. His fingers were cool, and the touch set my heart alight. "Does this make me believe you're a good man?" I asked, voice unsteady. He smiled tiredly. "No, I'm not a good man. But with you, I want to try. I meant to step back, but my feet rooted to the stone. His eyes held me deep slow with something fragile and ruthless inside them. Sarah, he said, before I stepped into your life, plenty of people wanted you gone. I'm just the first one who decided not to let it happen. I drew a breath, trying to steady the storm inside. Why? For the first time in years, he answered, I met someone who made me not want to win. Back at the estate, sleep still wouldn't come. Moonlight washed through the window and struck the mirror where my face looked back pale but different somehow. I opened the drawer and took out the note he'd sent with the dress. The slanted line, "Don't be afraid of the light," seemed to glow in the dark. I gave a short laugh, then felt tears fall. Maybe I was afraid, but not of the light. It revealed that I was starting to believe in a man who didn't deserve belief. When I switched off the lamp, footsteps sounded in the hall, light slow and stopping at my door. A long pause, then a voice, low, almost a whisper. Sleep, Sarah. I knew that voice even in a dream. Lucas. No knock, no more words. His breath on the other side of the wood was enough to know he was still there, whether as a warning or a comfort. I set my palm against the door, 2 thin layers of space between us. And in that moment, I understood that no matter how I tried to resist our fates, had already braided themselves together, tied by a thread only the heart could feel. That afternoon, Long Island broke into sudden rain. It fell so hard the rows of cypresses in the yard seemed to dissolve into the gray. I sat in the lamplit living room, listening to the downpour, drum the windows like a racing heartbeat. The wall clock read 4:12 more than 3 hours since Lucas Hayes had left the estate. Some old Sinatra tune murmured in the background, jazz drifting faintly through the air. Everything was 2 immaculate books arranged by shade black and white photos, aligned in perfect rows, a sofa without a single crease. It was as if he lived here but was never really there. A cold cup of coffee and a file I'd found on the table in the shallow desk drawer. I hadn't meant to read it, but the italic line on the cover stopped my heart, Project Covenant subject. Noah Lawson. My throat went dry. My hands shook as I turned the first page. Inside were test panels, hospital records, and even MRI images, all stamped with a private research institute, Hayes Medical Foundation. The numbers matched my son's chart. Except for one thing, the most recent blood draw was 2 days ago. 2 days ago. While Noah was in the hospital, I believed he was under Lucas's protection. The door opened softly. I startled so hard the file slipped from my hands. Lucas stepped in, shirt damp with raindrops still clinging to his wrist. He halted when he saw me, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes, surprise or caution. What did you find? He asked. So calm it chilled me. I crouched to gather the papers, unable to hide my trembling. You said you'd protect my son. So why is his name on a research project run by your foundation? He didn't answer right away. He removed his watch, set it on the table, then took the chair across from me, gray eyes steady. I want Noah cured, Sarah. Not managed. By turning him into a test subject, I choked out. What gives you that right? By giving him a chance to live, he said slowly. The protocol I asked Dr. Chen to try is gene therapy. It's unpublished, unapproved. They'll shut it down if I take it to the open market. But I have the means to make it real. Do you want your son to die in a public ward? I said nothing. Part of me knew he was telling the truth, but the other part the mother couldn't accept being written out of the choice. You should have told me, I said quietly. I have the right to know, and what would you do, refuse? His voice didn't rise, but it cut clean. Sarah, sometimes people break laws to save lives. Or to atone, I heard myself say before I could stop it. His gaze darkened, a cold spark flashing in the rain. Who told you that? No one had to, I said. I see it in your eyes whenever the past comes up. Lucas went still, then turned to the window, watching the rain shear down like silver wires strung across the sky. Who do you think I am? Sarah, I don't know anymore, I said, voice shaking. Sometimes I think you saved me. Other times, I'm afraid you're saving yourself through us. A heavy silence fell between us. Then Lucas spoke very softly, but so clearly it cinched my heart, they may be true. He stood, paced a few steps, then faced me again. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but if you still believe I won't harm your son's day. If you don't, I'll let you go. Tonight. I looked at him, the man every part of me wanted to flee and couldn't. You keep saying, trust me, but you've never given me a reason to. He came closer and stopped in front of me. Light from the lamps turned his eyes to fogged glass. Maybe because you're the one person I'm afraid to tell the truth to. How much truth, I asked. He leaned down, gaze catching mine close enough that I could hear his breath. Enough to know that if you walk away, I lose the only thing keeping me human. I stood there, heart suspended. He reached up and brushed my cheek. His fingers were cold from the rain, but the touch seared my skin. One day he said, I'll tell you why I'm afraid of mirrors. You don't like your face? I asked faintly. He whispered in them that I only see the shadows of the people I've hurt. Late. The rain stopped. I sat alone in the glass room facing the lake. On the table, the Project Covenant file lay open. Beneath the Hayes Medical Foundation seal was a handwritten note. Additional maternal genetic samples are needed to complete the encoding chain. The handwriting was Lucas's. I didn't know whether to cry or rage. When the door eased open, I snapped the file shut. Vincent entered with a glass of wine. "You've read it," he said, not a question. "I want to know if my son will actually be saved." Vincent said Mr. Hayes doesn't lie, setting the glass beside me. "But he never tells everything. You'll have to decide if the part you haven't heard is worth hearing." I looked up. The light glinted in his eyes. "How long have you worked for him? 18 years. He smiled somber. Since he was a kid, he had been standing between two coffins. I stiffened. "His parents..." "Killed," Vincent said flatly. "By the very people once called partners. Hayes grew up with scars that never heal. What makes him most dangerous isn't power, it's his capacity to love again. And you, Sarah." He paused. It seemed to have made that happen. I said nothing. My heart stumbled between the scent of wine and the last whisper of rain on the glass roof. "Don't be afraid," Vincent added, turning to go. "He only hurts those who try to hurt him. As for you, he'd die before he let anyone lay a hand on you." Night. I didn't sleep. In the dark, everything felt sharper. From the yard, a soft light bled through the glass, sketching Lucas's silhouette beneath the eaves shirt, still damp, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. He stared at the motionless lake like a statue remembering how to breathe. I rose and stepped out under the awning. The wind was raw. He turned at the sound of my footsteps. I saw his eyes soften. "You shouldn't be out." "It's cold," he said, voice low. "You're not sleeping either." He smiled, weary. People with too many sins forfeit the right to rest. I stood beside him, looking toward the distant lights. "Project Covenant. Is it truly to save Noah?" He turned to me and held my gaze. Not only him, other children too. The ones the world abandons. I trade money power, even my name, to buy them a chance. People see experiments. I see hope. I went still. For the first time, I heard truth in his voice, bare, unguarded. He said, "I used to think saving people was a way to pay for what I've done." Then I realized I was looking for someone who could make me feel forgiven. "And have you found that person?" I asked softly. He looked at me, and something gentled in his eyes. "I think I'm standing next to her." The wind rose, tangling my hair. Lucas reached to free it. We were close enough that his breath and my heartbeat seemed to move in the same rhythm. He spoke like a confession, "Sarah. If one day you have to choose between trusting me or leaving me, know that both carry a price." I didn't answer. I only looked into those gray eyes where my reflection trembled and warred with itself. In that gaze was something more fragile than the night, and stronger than anything that kept me from turning away. We stood in silence. As the rain's last echoes faded, only breath and heartbeat remained, a music no one else could hear. And for the first time, I understood that the face behind the glass was not only Lucas, but me, finally seeing my shadow reflected in him. The sky was veiled in a milky white haze that morning, like unwritten paper. I woke earlier than usual, not for work, not because of insomnia. Something inside me was stirring, as if instinct knew today wouldn't be like the others. The living room was quiet, marked only by the clock's slow tick. Lucas hadn't come home since last night. Vincent said he'd gone to settle old business in the city. I didn't ask for more in this place. The fewer questions you ask, the safer you are. On the table lay a small envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was Lucas's slanted firm. "Sarah, if I don't make it back by tonight, don't call. Trust that I'm still doing the right thing. And if the right thing makes you hate me, I'll accept it. No address, no signature." I set the letter down, my hand trembling. A draft slipped through the window, carrying the chill scent of damp earth after rain, like a sign that something had begun. At noon, Dr. Chen called. Her voice was urgent, hoarse with exhaustion. "Sarah, you need to come to the hospital immediately. Something's happened with Noah." My heart dropped into a void. I don't remember leaving the estate, only Vincent catching up and driving hard beneath the trees, tires slicing through puddles like rain in reverse. The hallway stretched long at Mount Sinai, the sharp antiseptic smell familiar, yet it offered no comfort this time. Dr. Chen was waiting by the ICU. She pulled off her glasses, her voice shook. "He went into anaphylactic shock. We stabilized him, but the cause was an overdose of the trial drug." I stared. What the protocol was vetted. It should have been. But someone swapped the vial this morning. She lifted her eyes, uncertainty flickering there. I suspect deliberate interference. I stepped back, disbelief clawing at me. Who has access to his treatment records? Dr. Chen hesitated. "Only me and Mr. Hayes." Her answer slid into me like a thin, cold blade. I said nothing more, only stared through the glass at my son. Noah lay still, his small face, pale fingers curled around the teddy bear I'd given him. Part of me still believed Lucas wouldn't do this, but the other part had begun to be afraid. By the time I returned to the estate, night had fallen. The corridors were dark. Everything seemed lacquered in a heavy sheen of silence. I called Lucas's name and heard only my own echo. The housekeeper appeared on the stairs, her face unfamiliar in the dim light. "Mr. Hayes hasn't returned," she said, "but someone wishes to see you." "I'm not seeing anyone. I'm afraid you don't have a choice." From the doorway, a stranger entered, a black suit, red tie, a cold face, and a smile thin as a cut. "I'm Kozlov," he said, and his accent is Eastern European, Lucas's former partner. I stood very still, pulse pounding. "What do you want?" he said, only to reclaim what's mine, his gaze skimming over me like a razor. "Project Covenant. Lucas stole it from me, but I know he can't finish without a small component in the source genome, and that component belongs to you." Ice flooded my veins. "You're lying." He shrugged. "Why do you think Lucas is so invested in you and your son?" His words hit the marble like shards of glass. I stepped back, but two men behind me blocked the way. "Don't be afraid," Kozlov said with that thin smile. "I won't hurt you. I only need a blood sample. You won't feel much. Not for long." I spun to run, but the door behind me was locked. I remembered Lucas's words in that sliver of panic. "If you doubt me, I'll let you go." But he'd never said where to go. Glass shattered. A dark figure burst through the window like the wind. Gunshots cracked. Crystal rained across the floor. Kozlov shouted and ducked behind a leather chair. Lucas stepped into a black coat thrown over his shoulders, blood streaking one cheek. He moved with the cold precision of someone who knew death well, each step measured unerring. "Sarah?" he rasped, voice rough outside. "No, you're hurt," I cried. "Outside, now. Command leaving no room to argue." I backed toward the door, heart hammering. Before I reached it, Kozlov snatched a pistol from the floor and aimed at Lucas. The shot split the air. I screamed. Lucas faltered half a beat, then spun his gun, answering so fast I could hardly see. His bullet struck Kozlov's hand. The weapon dropped clattering in widening circles until it lay still. Smoke and hot metal stung the room. Outside, rain began again. When I reached him, Lucas had slumped into a chair, his hand slick with blood. "You've been shot," I cried. "Grazed," he forced out, voice frayed. "You have to leave now. Vincent will take you and Noah. They'll be back." I shook my head, tears mixing with rain. "I'm not going anywhere. Not while you're here." He looked at me. The alarm light painted his gray eyes red. "Sarah, don't try to be brave. This world shows no mercy to the good." "I've never thought of myself as good," I said, pressing a cloth to his wound. "But I don't abandon people who need me." He gave a rough, broken laugh. Weariness and gratitude tangled together. "You don't understand. You don't belong here." I held his hand, speaking slowly. "If I've stepped in, then this is where I stand, no matter how dark." He studied me for a long time, then exhaled, eyes closing. "You don't know what sentence you just passed." Maybe I whispered, but at least I know who I'm standing with. Vincent arrived minutes later and got Lucas into the car. As we pulled away, I saw thin columns of smoke rising from the living room, shattered glass still flashing red with the emergency lights. Inside me was a strange mingling of fear and calm, as if fate had opened another door. Before dawn, we stopped on the outskirts of Boston. Lucas lay on the back seat, skin ashen cold, sweat beading. I stitched the wound myself, hands shaking over the needle and thread. When the final stitch was set, he opened his eyes, tired but smiling. "You should have been a doctor, Sarah." "You should learn to dodge bullets," I said, my voice unsteady. "Not everyone gets to choose." He squeezed my hand, his gaze gentling. "I promise to protect you and your son. But from now on, I'm not sure who's protecting whom." I tightened my grip. Outside, a pale dawn began to lift the horizon. Early light touched his face, cold, proud, and very real. For the first time, I saw Lucas not as a savior. As a man hurt and flawed, he still tries to keep the fragile light in his heart from going out. And in that moment, I knew whatever began between us, debt, fear, lies, the thing growing in the quiet, was no longer merely obligation. Morning poured over the wet road. I glanced at Lucas and said softly, "Do you know your letter didn't have an address?" He opened his eyes weary and deep, because I don't know if I have anywhere left to return to. I gave a shaky laugh through my tears. "Then, consider me your temporary address?" Lucas said nothing, only pressed my hand. The first light caught in his eyes a strange warm gray, and I understood that from this moment on, wherever we ran toward escape or toward redemption, our roads were bound together. Boston's morning was colder than I'd expected. On the road to the house hidden in the suburban woods, the fog lay so thick that the first rays of sun could only slip through the leaves in thin, weak breaths. Vincent parked cut the engine, then turned and said quietly, "Here is safe for now. Mr. Hayes needs to rest for at least a few days." I nodded. Lucas sat slumped in the back seat, face pale, but eyes unnervingly clear. When Vincent helped him out, he still tried to speak. "I have things to take care of." "I don't want to hear it." I cut in, not loud, but enough to stop him. "You're going to rest, no negotiating." He looked at me, something between defiance and gentleness lighting his gray eyes. "You giving me orders?" "No." I bent to steady his arm. "I saved you, and people don't give orders when they're holding someone's life in their hands." Vincent laughed, then left the keys on the kitchen table. "I'll keep watch outside. You two should sleep. This cabin used to be your mother's refuge." When the door closed, it was just the two of us in the wooden house. Everything here felt different from the Hayes estate. It was warm and straightforward with traces of real life. On the walls hung old oil paintings. Unfinished, a hand reaching into the sky, a faceless child, a white orchid blooming in ash. Lucas sank into a chair, drew a deep breath, and shut his eyes. I took gauze and antiseptic. He flinched when the cotton touched the wound, but made no sound. I knew he was used to pain, but in the dim light on his face, I realized for the first time it wasn't that he didn't feel fear. He simply never allowed himself to show it. "You told me your mother died in a robbery," I said softly. "Was it here?" Lucas opened his eyes, scanning the room as if searching its memory. "Yes. The police called it the House of Silence. No one heard the gunshots, even though the neighbors were less than 100 yards away." I set my hand on the table. "Were you here when it happened?" He nodded faintly. "I was 10. They were killed in front of me, and I hid under the table and listened to my mother call my name one last time." No tears, no tremor in his voice. But in his eyes I saw an ocean crushed into stillness. I said quietly, "No one should have to grow up with a memory like that." He smiled without warmth. "It taught me that if you want to protect someone, sometimes you learn to kill before you get killed." I said nothing as I wrapped the bandage. Each white loop around his arm felt like another layer of memory being covered neat cold and still bleeding somewhere I could not reach. By afternoon, Lucas woke from a light fever. I heard rough, uneven piano notes from the next room, like a man trying to recall an old melody. When I stepped in, he sat at the key's shirt collar. Open, warm light spilling over his bandaged hands. "I thought you needed rest." "This is how I rest," he said, touching the keys. The melody was strange, half sorrow, half urgency. "My mother taught me this one. She said, even in darkness, there is room for music." I sat beside him. Was she an artist? She used to sing. She was forced to stop after she married my father. He couldn't stand the woman he loved singing for other people. "And are you like him?" I asked. Lucas stilled his gaze, lifting to me a cold light in it. "I don't know. I'm not good at sharing either." I smiled a little. "Should I take that as a warning or a confession?" He tilted his head, a hint of a smile. "It depends on how afraid you are of me." "And you?" I countered. "How afraid of me are you?" The question silenced him. After a moment, he spoke so softly it was almost breath. "I'm afraid you'll make me forget why I exist." The air between us thickened. Rain ticked against the window. The scent of damp wood and resin tangled with the clean bite of antiseptic on his skin. Lucas leaned closer, his eyes resting on my cheek, and said slowly, "Sarah, I thought I'd lost the ability to feel. But you brought everything back, the things I want to keep and the things I'd rather forget." "You should be afraid of that," I murmured. "Feeling is always a weakness." He smiled. "Are you teaching me defense?" "No," I said. "I'm reminding myself not to trust too much." And yet when he lightly touched my hair, I didn't pull away. His hand was cold, but the touch jolted my heart not with desire, but something more profound, like two wounds had found each other. Night fell. The fire in the hearth burned bright, casting our shadows on the wall. I sat by the window, writing Noah that he might never read. My love. I'm somewhere you don't know, beside a man I can't call good, but I can't call bad either. Some people are born to save others from their own darkness, and he is one of them. If one day you ask me about love, I'll tell you true love isn't what makes you feel safe, but what gives you the courage to stop hiding. I paused. Tears blurred half a line. Behind me, Lucas came over. He said nothing, gently slid the paper from my hands, and silently read. When he finished, he set the page down, eyes never leaving me. "Would you think I'm mad if I told you I'm jealous of a child?" I looked up and smiled through tears. "You're not jealous. You're afraid. Afraid of what? Of a love you can't control." He fell quiet. Firelight caught in his gray eyes until they glowed like molten metal. Then he bent and touched his lips to my forehead, a kiss unhurried, unasking, heavy with weight. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not leaving me in the dark." I didn't know what to say. I only heard my heart race as if something had changed forever. At dawn, the rumble of an engine drifted from the distance. Vincent came in face severe. "We have to go. They've found the trail. Kozlov's alive." Lucas rose at once. "How long?" "Less than an hour." I looked between them, steadying myself. "Where are we going?" Lucas turned and took my hand. To the one place I swore I'd never return, the old Hayes Foundation headquarters. "You're going to turn yourself in?" "No." His hand tightened around mine. "I'm going to end this." In that instant, I saw a light in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not power, not cool control, but the resolve of a man who has chosen to love knowing he may lose everything. The car rolled out of the woods. The dim morning light slid across the glass, and over his face, composed, and beneath it, a single fine thread of fear stretched between life and death. I said softly to him, "You told me not to fear the dark, but if you fall into it, I'll follow." Lucas looked back, a sad smile on his lips. "Sarah, sometimes the one who steps into the dark for us is the only light we have left." And I understood there was no road back now. Only two people of fragile faith, and the darkness opening wide ahead. We reached the Hayes Foundation just as dawn brushed the city's edge. Boston's sky brightened with a dim, ashen light so solemn, it felt as if the place no longer belonged to the living, but to secrets already dead. The building stood in the middle of an abandoned industrial zone, ringed by rusted iron fencing. A brass plaque, Hayes Medical Research, still hung on the gate, cold and dull beneath the mist. A shiver ran through me. There was something in the air here that kept you from breathing too hard, as if a single wrong breath might wake the past. Vincent cut the engine and looked at Lucas. "You're sure?" Lucas answered in a low, resolved voice. "It's time." I opened the door and stepped out. The ground was damp and cold. The smell of rust, mingled with the faint tang of old chemicals, drifted from the dark rooms. The building looked like a wound that hadn't healed, broken panes, stained walls, and somewhere the steady drip of water ticking out the measure of guilt. The old operations room was on the 3rd floor. Lucas led the way, Vincent behind him, and I clutched the document bag inside, where all the Project Covenant files that Lucas had told me to guard at any cost were. The heavy door swung open, dust billowed. Light slipped through cracked glass and fell across metal tables where old bloodstains lingered. "This is where you used to work?" I asked softly. Lucas stopped. "No, this is where they made me work." He crossed to a corner where an old file cabinet stood. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Across the cover, stamped in red, were the words, "Covenant, Series 1. He flipped it open. Inside were photographs of children, thin, hollow-eyed. Each image carried a code and clinical notes. I froze. What did they do to these children? Lucas closed his eyes for a moment. Enhanced gene trials. My father authorized it. My mother opposed it. And she was dead 3 days later. The air turned to ice. I felt his grief not in his voice, but in the way he held himself upright with something broken in the middle. "You can't carry the blame for other people's sins," I said. He looked at me, eyes cold and sad. "I inherited them." Vincent scanned the room. "We need to move. Kozlov may have traced us from the estate." Lucas nodded. "I need the original data. It has to be destroyed before he gets it." We followed a dark corridor past empty labs. Every footfall echoed like the voices of old ghosts. At the end, a steel door bore the words, Lab 0, restricted area. Lucas swiped a card. Red light. He tried again. Still red. Vincent stepped forward, pulled a slim blade, and worked it into the lock. A minute later, the door released. Inside was an icy room. The machines were dusty, but a monitor still blinked a faint blue. In the center stood a glass tank nearly man-height filled with a cloudy fluid, and something shaped like a person suspended in silence. I backed away, fingers closing around Lucas's sleeve. "What is that?" He didn't answer. He stepped closer and peered through the glass. His gaze fixed on a small hand inside the tank on the wrist, a silver bracelet identical to mine. "Oh God," I breathed. "Is that an experimental clone?" Lucas said quietly, voice tight. "My father used my mother's genome and mine. They made a hybrid part, human part machine." Cold washed through me. "And you're the only one who can stop them." "No," he said, eyes still on the figure in the tank. "I'm the one who started them." For the first time since I'd met him, I saw him shake, not from fear, but from facing what he'd buried. I set a hand on his shoulder. "Then end it, Lucas, before it's too late." He nodded and moved to the control panel. And then gunfire cracked down the corridor. "Drop it!" Vincent shouted. Metal clanged, glass shattered, and a low, gravelly voice rolled in. "Don't destroy what took me 10 years to find Hayes." "Kozlov!" Lucas spun, dragging me behind the console. "Stay down!" I grabbed his hand. "Don't trust me." 3 shots. Shards flew. Vincent roared, then went silent. Lucas lunged out and fired back. Kozlov went down but was not dead. He crawled forward, gun still in hand, voice ragged. "You're no different from your father, except you know how to love." Lucas stepped in front of me, taking the line of fire. The bullet tore through his shoulder blood, spattering across the screen. I screamed and caught him as he sagged. "No!" Gritting his teeth, he reached for the console with blood-slick fingers. "Have to. Finish it." I helped him. Our hands pressed the purge all data command together. The system shuddered. Lines of red code flooded the display. Sirens wailed through the building. Kozlov stared at us, eyes gone feral. "You think destroying the data ends it? It's still alive. You can't erase yourself." Lucas raised his gun. "Then I'll learn how to die." The final shot thundered. Kozlov collapsed, the room's scarlet lights gleaming in his blood the color of endings. When the noise fell away, Lucas slid down the wall. I dropped to my knees beside him and bound the wound with my own shirt. "You are not going to die, do you hear me?" He managed a crooked smile, breath hitching. "You're relentless, because I believe you." He looked at me. The gray of his eyes was dim now, but that familiar light remained the light of someone who'd lived with darkness and still chose to face toward wherever I stood. "Sarah." He whispered, his voice like wind through a gap. "If there's another life, I want to begin again, not as a haze, not with guilt, just as a man who can sit by a lake with you and listen to Noah laugh." I bit my lip. Tears fell. "Don't talk. You're going to live. We'll come back." He shook his head. "If I live, the dark will come for you. If I die, it stops." "No, I don't believe that." His hand tightened around mine, already cooling. "Believe this, I have never regretted finding you." I clung to him, trying to hold the heat slipping away. In the distance, police and medevac rotors thumped the air. Vincent must have called for help before we lost him. Smoke started to curl through the room. The self-destruct system had kicked in. I hauled Lucas up. "We have to go." He shook his head and gave a wan smile. "You go. I'll lock the system down. If you stay, you'll die with me." "I'm not afraid." "I know, I am. I'm afraid of a world without you." He shoved me toward the door with a burst of strength. I stumbled into the hall as the steel slab slammed shut. I pounded on it, shouting, "Lucas!" From inside, his voice reached me softly, already far away. "Don't be afraid of the light, Sarah. It only reflects what you haven't dared to see in yourself." And then the blast. Fire roared. Red light flooded the corridor. Rescuers dragged me away as smoke stung my eyes. Just before I blacked out through the blaze, I saw him, a silhouette standing in a sea of light dissolving like ash, silent, beautiful, and unbearably heroic. 3 days later, I returned to the shore of Lake Forest. The winter-gray sky lay mirrored on the water. In my hand was the silver bracelet engraved Hope found in the lab ruins. I closed my fingers around it and whispered, "You were right, Lucas. Light doesn't die. It only changes shape to return to the place where it's expected." And when the wind came through carrying the faint scent of orchids, I knew he was still there, not in the darkness, but in my heart. I left the hospital on a late winter afternoon as light snow began to fall over the old streets near the Charles River. 3 days, they said, should be enough to recover from a shock. But no one knew the real shock wasn't in the body. It was that my heart was still waiting for someone who would never return. Police concluded the explosion at the Hayes Foundation was an accident caused by a gas leak. No bodies were identified, only melted shards of metal, and a silver bracelet engraved Hope, which they returned to me. I wear it around my neck as if I could hear his voice again by touching it. "Don't be afraid of the light." Noah is being treated at a new hospital in Boston, staffed by a team once funded by Lucas. My son is getting stronger. Color has returned to his cheeks, and his smile makes the world a little less cold. Whenever I look at him, I see Lucas's gray eyes, not the color, but the gaze steady warm with a fear hidden inside it of losing what matters most. Some nights I dream of him, not as someone dead, but as someone traveling very far away who still turns back to look at me. In the dream, I hear him say softly, almost a promise, "One day Boston will see a true dawn. When it does, you'll understand why I had to go." January deepened, and the snow lay thicker. I accepted an offer to return to Mercy, where I'd once left my past behind. My new ward was the Hera Pediatric Wing, fully funded by an anonymous donor. On my first day, I noticed a small inscription on the dedication plaque, in memory of those who chose light over survival. LH. I stood before those words for a long time. A nurse asked, "Do you know the donor?" I just smiled. Perhaps. That night, I left the hospital late. Boston's sky was ink dark. The Charles was half frozen, the lights along the Longfellow Bridge flickering like wavering strokes of brightness inside the dark. I stopped by an old cafe on Beacon Street where Lucas once said, "The coffee here tastes like memory, bitter and true." At the counter, the young barista handed me a cappuccino and a folded note. "The man in the long coat left this for you," she said. "He's gone." I opened it. Inside was a single sentence written in the slanted hand. I could never forget Charles River, 10:15. I checked the time at 10:10. I ran across the snowy street, my shoes soaking cold. Wind stung my face. When I reached the Longfellow Bridge, I stopped breathing hard. Under the pale streetlights, the river drifted slowly, so quiet I could hear the snow itself falling. And then, at the far end of the bridge, I saw a man standing with his back to me. The silhouette my bones remembered was a black coat collar up tall and straight. "Lucas," I breathed. Somehow he heard. The man turned. Light fell across his face, thinner now, a fine scar tracing his left cheek. But those eyes, the exact look that made me almost drop every reason to exist. I couldn't believe it. I walked toward him slowly, afraid that he would vanish if I moved too fast. "You're alive." He smiled as thin as the night wind. "Harder to kill than you thought." I stopped a few steps away, fingers tight around the silver bracelet. "They said you were there is no they. There's only me and a plan that wasn't perfect." His voice was low and light, still edged with the tremendous pride I remembered. "Kozlov is dead. The date is gone. But there are others behind him. I had to disappear so they'd believe it was over." I was silent, tears hot in the snow. "Why didn't you tell me? Do you know?" Lucas stepped closer, stopping me with a look that reached through me. "If you knew I was alive, you'd search. If you searched, they'd find you. I wouldn't risk it." "You think I'm afraid?" "No," he said softly. "I am." I laughed through tears. "You're always afraid of the wrong thing." He studied me for a long moment, then said, voice shaking in the wind, "Yeah. I didn't come back to drag you further in. I only needed to see that you and Noah are all right. I have nothing left to give except knowing you're safe." I stepped forward and drew out the silver bracelet he once kept. "You're wrong. You gave me everything, hope, courage, and a reason to live through days I thought no one would." He looked at the bracelet. His fingers brushed mine. The familiarity stole my breath. "Keep it," he said hoarse. "I don't need it anymore." "No," I shook my head. "I won't keep a relic of someone who disappears. I want to keep the person." Lucas smiled, then faintly and discernibly. "You haven't changed Sarah. Still reckless like the night you stood in the rain and defied the world to save one man. Because that man was worth it." He was quiet, then murmured, "If the world were fair, I wouldn't have met you that way." I stepped closer until our breaths met. We might never have learned how to love if the world were fair. A gust swept over us. Snowflakes settled on his shoulder and melted in his warmth. He lifted a hand to my cheek. His fingers were ice, and my heart was fire. "Sarah, I have to go. Where far enough they won't find me. But promise me whatever you hear, whoever comes, don't follow." "No," I said, eyes fixed on his. "This time you don't get to choose for me." He fell silent. Half his face lay in shadow, half in light. He lowered his head and whispered, "You know, everything I've done, even vanishing, was because I feared the day the light in your eyes would die when you looked at me." I answered so quietly that only he could hear. "That light is you, Lucas, and it has never gone out." He pressed a long, quiet kiss to my forehead as if printing it into memory. He said, "If there's another world, I'll find you there. Without debts. Blood, just a man who loves you." "You don't need another world," I whispered. "I'm still here." Lucas stepped back. The streetlight washed over him, making him a brightness ribbon woven into the snow mist. He said softly, "You deserve peace, Sarah. I only know how to carry storms." Then he turned. I tried to call out, but my throat locked. He crossed the bridge, his figure fading into the haze until it blended with Boston's night. I stood there for a long time until the snow ceased. I found a small envelope in my coat pocket that he must have slipped there. Inside, a single line in his hand. "Don't look for me. If dawn comes, trust that I can still see it with you." The next morning, the city brightened after the night's snow. I took Noah to the park by the river. He ran through the white laughing music Lucas once promised he'd write again. I looked up at the sky, light scattered on the water like glass. And in that brightness, I thought I saw his black coat standing far away smiling. Maybe it was only a mirage, or it was real. But I know that when night returns to Boston, there will always be a gaze watching over me on the border between darkness and dawn, where love doesn't need to exist, to be named, only to be believed, still there. 3 months after that snowy night, spring came to Boston with a new kind of light. Warm, gentle, no longer smelling of parting. I moved with Noah to the Red Hook waterfront, where the sea opens wide, and silver waves tap the old wooden pier like a heartbeat counting out the slow rhythm of peace. Each morning, I open the window to small boats drifting idly by, and it feels like the city is learning to breathe again. An old piano sits by the window in the living room, a gift Vincent sent a week after I left the hospital. His note said only, "He taught me that some pieces don't need endings as long as someone remembers them." I've read that note at least 10 times. Every time I can hear somewhere inside me that quiet melody that Lucas once played in the lakeside cabin. Noah is completely well now. He likes to sit on the porch and paint the waves in pale blue. Mom, he says I dreamed someone was standing offshore watching me. I answer softly. Maybe that's the one who keeps the sea from ever sleeping. He smiles and nods, believing with the whole of himself that children still believe in things grown-ups have forgotten. One afternoon, while I was filing documents for the Hare Foundation, a courier brought a small parcel with no return address. Inside was a black leather notebook that smelled faintly of sea salt. On the first page, if you're reading this, the light has found its way back. Don't cry. I've kept my promise just from the other side of the world. LH. I turned the pages. There were unfinished research notes interleaved with brief lines, day 48. Seas are calm. Possible to go on. Day 72. I miss her less, but the missing is deeper. Day 90. Do you believe some wounds aren't meant to heal because they're where love takes shelter? I closed the notebook and drew a long breath. I didn't need proof to know he was alive. Somewhere between sea and sky, Lucas still existed, a promise that refused to dissolve in the wind. That evening, I took Noah down to the pier. The sun set late, laying gold across the water. I sat on the wooden steps, my light coat pulled close, listening to the waves knock against an old hull. Did you know I said people used to believe each wave was a soul coming home to land? Maybe one of them is our friend. Noah tilted his head, eyes on the horizon. If I throw a letter into the sea, will he get it? If he ever loved you, I said, smiling, he'll find it. He scribbled a few lines and let the paper go. It glimmered in the sunset as it drifted out smaller and smaller until it was only a spark. I didn't ask what he wrote. I only knew that in that moment, I believed some words don't need to be spoken to reach where they're meant to go. Night. Red Hook Harbor lit up. I sat alone by the window. The piano waited quietly. Outside, the sea lifted in gentle swells, and the moon shattered into 1,000 silver fragments. I touched the keys and began the piece Lucas left behind. The first note trembled, then settled into calm. I closed my eyes. In the sound, I heard his voice not far away, but as if he were standing right behind me, Sarah. I told you. I don't need forgiveness only to be remembered. I smiled as tears slid into my hands. I remember, but I'm also learning to live, Lucas, because of you. A soft breeze slipped through. The curtains stirred. The scent of white orchids arrived like a late hello. The next day, I went to the Hare Foundation office. At the press conference launching our new treatment program, I read the short speech I'd written through the night. There are people we cannot keep, but they leave a flame within us, not to warm, but to illuminate. I've learned that light doesn't live without darkness. It lives where we keep choosing love, knowing we might lose. And sometimes love is daring to live fully after the world inside us has collapsed. As I stepped down, a man in the last row stood and slipped out tall, broad-shouldered, close-cropped hair, an old black coat. I didn't see his face, but my heart knew before reason did. I didn't follow. I walked to the door and looked toward the docks where noon light burned bright across the sea. Inside, I heard his voice one last time. If dawn comes, trust that I can still see it with you. Back home, I found a small package on the table that afternoon. No sender, just a line on the label for the things left unsaid. Inside was a USB drive. I opened it, and there was a single recording. Wave sounds wind, and then Lucas's voice. I knew you'd find this. Don't cry, Sarah. Life owes us nothing, but I owe you a lifetime of peace. If one day you forget everything, I hope you still remember the feeling of fearing nothing, because that was the moment I loved you. Wind braided into surf, then faded out. I sat very still, my hands gripping the headphones. In that moment, I understood that some people don't leave because love has ended, but because their love is too large to fit in a single lifetime. I stepped onto the balcony as evening fell over the sea. The last light scattered across the waves like a million broken mirrors, beautiful, blinding, true. I set my hand to my chest and whispered, "You promised not to let the light go out. And you kept your promise." Night wind curled through, carrying the ocean's salt and a little warmth from what was lost. I closed my eyes and pictured Lucas standing somewhere out on the open water, gray eyes turned toward the shore. No more fear, no more hiding, only two souls that once lost each other, now finding peace in their own ways. I looked at the far line where the sea meets the sky, and for the first time in so long, I smiled because no pain is large enough to drown the faith that love never truly ends, if it's real. If this story touched your heart, share how you feel. Sometimes a single line, a small heart left on a screen, is enough to help another story get written. Let's keep spreading stories of love loss and belief so the light within us never disappears.